Hello, welcome to InventCast, a podcast show from Capgemini Invent. In this show, we explore new ways for you to adapt and grow for the future in strategy, technology, data science, creative designs, and building what's next for your business. My name is Parry. I'm an account executive with Capgemini, and I'm here to discuss about IT related mergers and acquisitions, aspects around IT. And in this podcast, this particular episode, more particularly on IT integration. It is important to remember that customers that are not going to stand still, nor will competitors, who often use these dormant periods of M&A to steal business from either company, acquirer, or target. So one needs to integrate fast and communicate transparently while ensuring that operations continue to run smoothly. Now, how can leaders ensure a well planned strategy for a successful IT integration? And for that, we have a specialist here. We have Ludvig Daae with us here today to give us a deep dive into integration. Thank you, Ludvig. Welcome.
Hello, thanks for having me here today. My name is Ludvig Daae and I'm Director in IT in Mergers and Acquisitions. In my role, I support IT leaders of global organizations to navigate through the complexity of IT mergers and acquisitions.
Now, I speak on behalf of the companies that I partner with, and also a lot of my colleagues who manage clients, client partners, account executives who deal with their customers who are probably acquiring a company, and hence integration becomes important. So, we're speaking on for those stakeholders now. Integrating a new company, a question beckons: is the acquirer capable of becoming a strong corporate parent? Because it's common for executives to focus on what this acquisition is bringing to my company to transform my business. But wait a second, what about accelerating profitably the asset that has been acquired? So I think, there's so much focus on the company's financial resources and markets, but we're talking about unifying technology also. And we want to look at both the sides of the coin. So tell us, Ludwig, what have you seen in the marketplace?
This is typically about the integration strategy, and the decision on what is the corporate parent is mostly made when the merger is on the table and the negotiations are going on. I think it would be really good to include the digital aspect in these negotiations as well. As a good example, where the decision was made on where would be the headquarter was the merger between Ahold and Delhaize. So this was a few years ago, and during the agreements, they decided to have the headquarters in Zaandam, which was the former Ahold location.
And apart from location, can you give us a view on the assets, the knowledge capital, the technology capital, and how the parent versus the company that's being acquired? How do you go about paying attention to strengths on both the sides as a partner to the integration lead?
Yeah, I think looking at strengths, we have, of course, the due diligence phase in which we would do a preliminary review of where are the strengths of the both companies and how can they integrate. So that's already a bit of the first direction. When moving forward and drafting the integration plan, it's really good to work in a structured way. So we have developed templates. So, for example, one of the companies we have been integrating was a utility company. We used templates to analyze the situation at the target. That helps also to make sure that no part got lost in the analysis and you really have an overall view of where is the value coming from. And so it's all about value, and you need to identify the areas where there is specific value. So starting from the due diligence report, and during the integration, you will further dive into that to make sure that you are harvesting the value at the right time.
I'm glad you brought that out, and that makes a lot of sense for the company that's being acquired, because often there's a lot of maximization of capital that can be gained by finding the true strengths on the digital side also. So you mentioned this just goes to show that the integration lead is there to deliver strategic synergies and deliver operational excellence. And you've given a good example of what you've done and the template that you've created. Moving further, so that before we get transactional, I just want to probe on a little step up, and maybe for some of the non specialists here, how does the acquirer of this new company, that is acquiring IT designs and applications, you've got ERP, CRMs, infrastructure cloud, and they're trying to see it vis-a-vis their own, you're trying to compare it with your own such systems. Now there's good on either sides, and the parent company is trying to find one way of working, one way of selling, one way of making, on the bottom line side as well as top line. So you're looking at financial impact. How do you see it? What have you observed? Give us a view.
What I think is typically in these situations, it's quite easy to say we are the acquiring company, and you will follow our structure. But that can be a risk. For example, an industrial company from the US who wanted to buy a European company, which was much more focused towards the local market, would not benefit from a large-scale ERP system like SAP, because this company was really differently organized. So if you would choose to disclose moving this company into the template of the acquiring company, then you would break up value. So that's typically something you are not looking for. So you should be careful and evaluate the different aspects of the IT organization on itself and see how this relates also to the business objectives. So I think that that's really key. Always look at these business objectives, and from there get an understanding of where is the IT integration of value, and where can both companies exchange their value and their assets in a positive way.
I recognize that, and I also read a recent HBR article on M&As where there was an example of two banks that were merging in the Middle East. And this example was interesting, where one of the pillars of success was to ensure that the team that was identified pre-integration played a role in the post-integration process. And do you want to give us a view how that is so important to capture knowledge and information and ensure that all the KPIs that were listed out are met post-integration? Can you just tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing. So what we typically see is different models in the market. So models where we have a company doing the due diligence and helping with the getting the deal done, and then afterwards another company is doing the integration. But I think it's really important to have a company who is doing the full process. And the advantage of that is that as companies are mostly driven by KPIs, they are feeling themselves also integrally responsible for the end-to-end piece of work. Taking this responsibility end-to-end instead of doing the deal and then getting the money and moving to the next deal is really a big difference. Because I think sometimes it might be a bit too positive, and of course we have all kinds of valuations and things to make it balanced. But I think it's also important for the company as a whole to get the benefits out as they were expected at the beginning, so no disappointments. And that's why I say it's really good to have one company doing both the due diligence and also do the integration, because then the objectives are in line.
Well said. Continuity is key here. Now, we know one size fit all doesn't work here. So, a question that pops up is, you've done this a number of times for various organizations. You've done integration and you've followed process post due diligence. What sort of size of a consulting partner do you need? There are people on the client side who have an integration team, taking over different roles on the IT side also. And then you have a consultant coming in and you're trying to identify representatives that are needed. So keeping in mind how much time does this process take based on the size of the company, and how many FTEs are needed to support this process, integration process, to unlock this value and to leave the company in a healthy space. Just give us an example and give us a flavor of what you've seen to help the audience understand the process better.
Yeah, so I think it's really depending on the situation. So, what type of company are you acquiring and integrating? The company which has not that much IT, for example, an industrial company. Just an example. I recently supported them with their integration planning. This was an industrial company in Europe, quite small, about 600 people working for it, and helping them to integrate IT is just not that big team. So you can imagine it's between 20 maximum 25 people working on it, setting up the whole thing, and the project team preparing for it would be probably 5 or 4 people. But we also have examples like the integration of a large industrial chemical company. We are also doing that. And in this, there are hundreds of people working on the integration. So you have people in project teams doing the ERP integration, working on the IT integration. So all different aspects you need to take into account. And then you can imagine that you will have different work streams for infrastructure, for ERP, for the organizational part, etc., etc. So then it can be really big. So it can be easily 1,000 people working on an integration for such a big conglomerate, as in the example I just mentioned.
That's nice to hear. I do recall reading about when Shell acquired British Gas, how communication played a role. And it reminds me again, when you mentioned such large teams, where there was a very good process of communication, there was a very good process of setting up such expert teams. And this was a good example. Again, I read online recently, which just goes to show that you need expertise coming in, and you need interaction and communication with both the sides of the organization to ensure you maximize the value. Thank you. And moving to the next one quickly, let's go further on, the steps that a company would take. You've got IT systems and IT infra and the organogram, and there's a process that one would follow. And I remember the example, the analogy from archaeology, where one tends to unearth value. You dig and you unearth value that's there for ages. So I'm thinking, you have a certain approach, a certain process to unearth such value. So I'm sure the listeners are intrigued. What would you do to unearth such value? What are your data processes, and what are your industry practices that you follow that could benefit the company and help the integration team towards this unlocking?
Yeah, so one of the things I mentioned earlier was having clear templates, which make sure that you do a clear inventory of all integration points. That's one. The other thing is if you're looking at systems and integrating systems, I think it's really vital to have a clear blueprint that points out how to integrate these systems. And for example, I have supported an energy company who bought two energy retail companies, and these had the objective to bring two systems together and build one new system to replace the two old systems. And that was typically something for which they didn't develop a blueprint. So when we came in to help the organization to bring the program back on track, and we reviewed the whole thing, we noted that there was no blueprint. So we helped them to make the blueprint first, and then we found out that it would be better to merge the contents from the one company in the system from the other company rather than building a new system. But this was quite a big decision. And another example, so for example, for infrastructure, we see that lots of companies are moving to the cloud. And I think this is really a great opportunity. But at the same time, you can have existing contracts which are holding you back to move to the cloud. And so there has been organized data center space for several years, and the contract has been signed just 1 year ago. So you still have to stay in the contract. So for these kinds of things, we see that contract management and properly handling these contracts should be also one of the key elements when organizing an integration project. So we typically organize a separate stream for contract management.
I think one of the points that you've laid out today also gives confidence that you tend to hear when two companies merge or a company gets acquired. One of the things that you tend to fear is FTE reduction and removing redundant roles. So there's a lot of talk about redundancy. But what I learned today and what I've experienced from yourself also is there's so much value that's coming from systems and processes and digital assets that have been running those companies for years. So I'm sure that gives you time to first focus on value before looking at redundancy. So I'm really glad you brought it out today. Finally, for this episode, I'd like to hear from you. You've done this so many times. So what is your final takeaway to the integration lead and the CIO or the CDO? What are your pearls of wisdom? You've done this so many times, so you might have 2 cents, and something which you would recommend to do and something you would not recommend to do.
Yeah, so what I would recommend is to have a clear governance structure with clear templates which are helping you to structure the whole integration project. The other side, what would I not recommend to do is see an integration project as an ordinary program management exercise, because that's typically not the case. There are some specifics, like we mentioned in this podcast, on finding value and making sure that value is captured at the right moment. And these kinds of things are typically some things which you need a specialized IT integration advisor for. So make sure you are not running it as a program, an ordinary program, but do a real integration program with clear templates, a clear governance structure, and focus on value.
Yeah, and perhaps we have an example with our own Capgemini Invent, and that's probably an exciting example that you could share, which followed these principles. Would you like to do that?
Yeah, I think Capgemini Invent is really wanting to become a digital leader. And I think if you look at the market, we are doing more and more digital business. But to become a digital leader, you need to have the capabilities which are helping you to accelerate on that side. So we decided to buy also other companies. And one of these companies is a company called Altran. And Altran has the unique capability that they are very strong in the operations technology. Capgemini is very strong in software development and cloud and infrastructure systems, etc. Bringing these together is perfectly in line with the situation and we see in the market that OT and IT are coming more and more together. So what we did for that is we organized that also in a way that we also used the standard template for that. So to make sure that we identify the things where we would like to integrate, and we set up a strong project governance above this. But what we also did is we decided to keep these companies apart together. So keeping them their own unique marketing, but at the same time being part of the group. And that's a typical strategic decision you would make in the boardroom, and you would handle during the integration program. And so that's typically things you really need to include when integrating companies. And these are really setting the guidelines for making sure that you are doing the right things in the integration program.
Wonderful. So practice what you preach, and I assume with the Altran acquisition, we practiced what we've been preaching in the marketplace, and as we advise other integration leads in the marketplace. Thank you again, Ludvig. You've been very patient and enterprising here with your examples, and I'm sure the audience is excited with the examples that you've posted, and they would want to learn more. So I'm sure there's a way to reach out to you. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, and I was glad to be here.
Look forward to everybody subscribing to our podcast on YouTube or SoundCloud. Thank you. Have a nice day.